today I'm here to bring you the first part of my March wrap-up. I have read 4 books so far this month, so it's not the best month, but it's not shocking either. I'm quite happy with what I've read. One of those books was also really big, so it's not too bad at all. So I'll get straight into it. Firstly, I read Sufficient Grace by Amy Espeseth. This was in the February Moth box and was a fantastic read. I have done a separate review which I will link down below, so I won't go into it too much here, other than to say that I really enjoyed this. It's about a sort of quiet Christian community in Wisconsin, and it sort of looks at the dilemmas of religion and the dilemmas of the society itself through the eyes of a young girl. It's really well worth a read, and I'm definitely very, very glad that I picked up the Moth box, because I wouldn't have discovered this otherwise. And I think that's what's fantastic about subscription boxes and things like that, that they do sort of make you aware of books that you might not have necessarily been aware of before. So there was that one. Then I got my library pick for the month, which I was very excited to find in the library. It's Here I Am by Jonathan Safran Foer. Now, me and Jonathan, we have a very special relationship. He was sort of probably the person who made me interested in literary fiction. When I was in my teens, I read Everything is Illuminated by him. I then went on to read Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which became my favourite book of the time. I was obsessed with it. I would like to reread that now and see what my experience with it was, because I think it would probably be quite different now. But he was definitely the first sort of literary author that I really got excited about. So this book and me, we had a journey. Now, I loved this because of my relationship with Jonathan, good old Johnny, because I have previous love for Jonathan Safran Foer. I don't know if people who don't necessarily love him would enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. I think really, if I was completely honest, it was a 3-star read, but because I have that connection with the author, I did have to boost it up there, and it did mean that bit more to me, and I really enjoyed the process of reading it. But in terms of the actual content, I would say it is probably more of a 3-star. So it's going to be quite hard for me to review this, because I think it's difficult to separate my feelings for the author from my feelings for the book. But I'm going to try anyway. So Jonathan Safran Foer is a Jewish author, and he often writes about Jewish families, especially in Everything is Illuminated. It's about a Jewish man trying to sort of go back to his ancestry and look at his past. And this is no different. It follows a Jewish family, and it's basically a family saga. Now, the reason probably that this would have been a 3-star if it was from somebody else is because I don't particularly like saga books. I don't particularly like family sagas. It's why I don't like Zadie Smith. I don't enjoy that style. I just find it quite bitty and a little bit hard to get into. If you like Zadie Smith, I would say definitely give this a go, because it's very much reminded me of Zadie Smith books that I've read. But this basically predominantly follows Jacob, the dad of this family. It also follows his wife Julia and his son Sam. His son is coming up to his bar mitzvah, but he doesn't want one, and they're not particularly a practicing Jewish family, so he doesn't really understand why he has to have this bar mitzvah. And it kind of looks at a load of different issues from there. So we follow all of the family through their different trials and tribulations. Jacob and Julia having massive marriage issues, and they're realising that they don't really connect anymore, and that it's sort of their children that cement them. And it looks at the fact that parents, when they have children, they do automatically love the children more than each other, and is that a problem, and how can they get past that? It looks at Sam's issues of coming of age and everything that goes with that. I really enjoyed it. The storyline in itself wasn't phenomenal or exceptional or anything like that, but the thing that Jonathan Safran Foer does is that he comes up with these really poignant moments in books, and he just hits life on the head, and it just makes you stop and think, and I love that. I would say that his writing is not probably the best. Like, there are in this, I noticed especially, there's a lot of speech, and a lot of people say, you know, speech is the best way to show, but I think that the speech should probably be broken up with some other things. There are pages and pages of speech in here, especially at the beginning. And I also found at the start that sort of things would be mentioned and then we'd move on, and it wouldn't necessarily explain those things, but then as you're reading, those things come back and you realise the relevance of them. And I really liked that, actually, in the end. As I say, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I wouldn't necessarily start with this if you have never read Jonathan Safran Foer before. I would say probably start with Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, because I think that's probably the easiest to read, and it's a short read because there's not much writing to a page, and it gives you a good taste of what he can do. I would say if you've had good experiences with him before, I would definitely give this a go. I've noticed that a lot of people are quite sort of blocked off to Jonathan Safran Foer, and I don't know why, because he is a really, really good writer. Like, he has his flaws like any writer, but I think he is, in the soul, he is a good writer. I love his soulfulness. That's what I like. Then I read my YA pick for the month, which was Where She Went by Gail Forman. This is the follow-on from If I Stay by her, which I read years and years ago now. I have to say, out of all of my YA attempts this year, this has been the most successful. Although it does follow on from If I Stay, it's kind of, you could probably read this, I don't know if you could read it without having read If I Stay, but I think If I Stay could have stood as a standalone, and this is kind of an extension of it rather than a follow-on. So basically, it's going to be hard to talk about this without giving spoilers to the first one. I'm going to try my best, but if you want to read the first one and you haven't, then probably mute for the duration of this review. I'll give a thumbs up when I'm done. As I say, I'm going to try my best not to give spoilers, and I think what happens in it If I Stay is quite obvious anyway, but regardless, if you don't want to know, don't listen. So basically, in If I Stay, Mia has had a car accident that's killed her family. She's in a coma, but she's sort of having out-of-world experiences, and she's trying to decide whether she wants to stay living or die with her family. In the end, she decides to stay, which I think, as I say, is not necessarily a spoiler because there's a second book, so what did you think happened? And in this book, we follow who her boyfriend was at the time, Adam. He's now a big rock star, and Mia is getting quite big in the classical music world. She plays cello, and we know that from the first book. And in this, basically, we know that she has completely cut ties with Adam for no apparent reason. He doesn't really understand why. She sort of, when she woke up, she was a different person, and he found it quite hard to interact with her, and that led ultimately to the breakup of their relationship. But Adam is still very much pining for her, and in this, he ends up going to one of her concerts, and she calls him backstage, and they sort of talk it out. I have to say, I thought this was going to go one way in the end, and it didn't, and I can see why it didn't. It's a YA book, and I know most people don't like sad endings like me, but I would have liked it to have taken that risk and gone down that path and sort of said, like, it would have sent a different message, and I think it would have been a good message, especially to have in a YA book, because not everything works out the way you want it to. But regardless, I did enjoy this. The reading experience was quite good, the writing was really good, and for a YA it wasn't half bad. And then finally, I read my short story pick for the month, which was Anton Chekhov's The Steppe and Other Stories. This was my first Chekhov, and I have to say I am completely in love with him. I think he is my soul brother now. We are one. Chekhov, I don't know if he ever actually wrote a novel, but he was a Russian short story writer. He died in 1904, so I assume he was writing in the 1800s. And seemed to have a very interesting view of the world, and he has such a way with words. Like, you read him and it's like he's just effortlessly saying these magnificent things that are just completely groundbreaking, but they're just so standard for him. It's amazing. So these stories, considering that they were written a very long time ago, I think short stories were very different in the olden days to what they are now. Now they're sort of an art form in their own right, whereas I think in the olden days short stories were much more just stories or told like novels that are just a lot shorter than novels. So it's a very different reading experience to a modern day short story collection. The stories are much more delicate and they don't necessarily have a big impactful punch, but they are so well written that it doesn't matter. And obviously, as with any short story collection, some of them were more hit and miss than others. Some of them I really didn't enjoy that much, whereas others absolutely blew me away. There was one in here about a man who makes coffins and his wife is dying and he's sort of struggling with his business, and he's just this really cantankerous and unpleasant old man. And he was just fascinating to read about. There's also one in here about a man who wants to be rich, and the devil, he ends up meeting the devil. The devil appears quite a lot in here. And the devil ends up saying that if the man gives him his soul, he will give him all the riches he wants. And obviously the man finds out that riches aren't everything, and that actually you can still be unhappy and have all the money in the world. So this very much looks at sort of social issues, and it looks at issues of the rich and poor divide and how actually money isn't necessarily the answer to everything. It's also got a story in here involving a vegetarian. I mean, come on, 1800s, and we're talking about vegetarianism here. And it's quite interesting. One of the characters sort of, at first he's a bit taken aback by this guy's vegetarianism, and then he says, well, I suppose one day we'll actually realise that killing animals is not okay. No, Chekhov, no. People don't. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. So I would say if anyone wants to write short stories, definitely read this guy. He he has such a way with the craft, and it's just the language that he uses. It's basically character study. The way he studies these characters is so good. Like, I would definitely recommend. So it's not been a bad month so far. It could have been worse. I could have got more read, but isn't that always the way? But there we go. So let me know down below how your reading's going so far this month, and I will see you next time. Bye.